He immediately arranged for Mary to be moved to a comfortable hotel while he figured out a permanent solution. But Vincent didn't want to just throw money at the problem. He wanted to do something that would truly honor the woman who'd given so much of herself to his family. He decided to build Mary a house, not just any house, but a beautiful home where she could live with dignity and comfort for the rest of her life. The project became Vincent's obsession. For the first time in years, he felt genuine purpose. He personally oversaw every detail, from the architectural plans to the interior design. He wanted the house to reflect Mary's personality, warm, welcoming, filled with light and love. He spared no expense, but more importantly, he invested his time and attention in ways he'd never done before. During the construction process, Vincent found himself spending hours at the building site, something his security team strongly discouraged, but which he insisted upon. He wanted to understand every aspect of the project to ensure that Mary's house was built with the same care and attention she'd given to raising him. While Vincent was discovering the satisfaction of using his wealth for genuine good, Caroline was facing new challenges of her own. The construction company she worked for had lost a major contract, and suddenly half the workforce was laid off. Caroline, despite being one of the most reliable workers, found herself unemployed along with dozens of her colleagues. Finding new construction work in Lagos proved more difficult than Caroline had expected. The industry was competitive, and many contractors preferred to hire men, believing they were stronger and more reliable. Caroline spent weeks walking from site to site, her savings dwindling as she struggled to find steady employment while still supporting her 3 siblings. Finally, Caroline heard about a construction company that was actively seeking skilled workers for a special residential project. The pay was excellent, the working conditions reportedly good, and they claimed to hire based on skill rather than gender. Caroline applied immediately and was thrilled when she was hired after a practical skills test that she passed with flying colors. The project, Caroline learned, was building a custom home for a wealthy client who was personally invested in the construction process. The client reportedly visited the site regularly, ensuring that every detail met his exacting standards. Caroline didn't mind working for demanding clients. In her experience, people who cared about quality often treated workers with more respect than those who were indifferent. What Caroline didn't know was that the client was Vincent Adebayo, and that their paths were about to cross once again in the most unexpected way. Vincent's visits to Mary's construction site had become a regular routine. He genuinely enjoyed watching the progress, talking with the workers, and learning about the construction process. For the first time in his privileged life, Vincent was interacting regularly with people who worked with their hands, who understood the dignity of physical labor, who weren't impressed by his wealth, but respected his genuine interest in their craft. The irony was perfect. Vincent, who'd been searching for authentic human connection, was finding it at a construction site, while Caroline, who'd shown him what authenticity looked like, was now working at that same site without either of them knowing. Meanwhile, Vincent's companies were preparing for their annual charity gala, a massive event that raised millions for various causes across Lagos. This year's theme was building communities, focusing on housing and infrastructure projects for underserved populations. Vincent, inspired by his experience building Mary's house, had decided to make this gala more meaningful than the usual superficial networking events he despised. He wanted to invite people who actually worked in community development, not just wealthy donors looking for tax breaks and social recognition. Against his event planner's advice, Vincent insisted on inviting representatives from construction companies, community organizations, and local workers who were directly involved in building Lagos's infrastructure. Caroline learned about the gala invitation through her new employer. The construction company had been invited to send representatives to showcase their work on community projects. Caroline wasn't initially supposed to attend. These events were typically for supervisors and managers, not regular workers. But when the company's senior foreman fell ill at the last minute, Caroline was asked to attend as the worker most familiar with their current community housing projects. Caroline had never attended anything like a charity gala. She didn't own appropriate clothes and couldn't afford to buy a fancy dress for one evening. But her younger sister Blessing, who'd been saving money from a part-time job to buy herself new school clothes, insisted that Caroline use the money to rent an outfit. Blessing argued that this could be an important opportunity for Caroline's career, and that the family should support her just as she'd always supported them. Reluctantly, Caroline agreed. She found a simple but elegant dress at a rental shop in Acadia, nothing too fancy but appropriate for the occasion. She felt nervous and out of place preparing for an event in Victoria Island's most exclusive hotel, surrounded by Lagos's elite, but she was determined to represent her company professionally. Vincent approached the charity gala with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was excited about the event's focus on meaningful community work rather than superficial socializing. On the other hand, he dreaded the inevitable parade of people trying to impress him, seeking business opportunities, or angling for donations to their personal projects. He'd specifically requested that his security team be less obvious than usual, wanting to interact with guests more naturally rather than being surrounded by an intimidating barrier of bodyguards. Vincent wanted this evening to feel different from his usual social obligations, more authentic, more connected to real purpose. The Victoria Island Ballroom was transformed into an elegant showcase of Lagos's development projects. Display boards showed before and after photos of housing developments, infrastructure improvements, and community centers built through various charitable initiatives. Vincent moved through the crowd, genuinely interested in the projects being presented, asking detailed questions that surprised guests accustomed to wealthy donors who wrote checks without really caring about impact. Caroline arrived at the gala feeling overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, servers in white gloves carrying champagne that probably cost more than her monthly salary. She stayed close to her company's display area, discussing their community housing projects with interested guests, trying to focus on her professional responsibilities rather than feeling intimidated by the wealth surrounding her. Neither Vincent nor Caroline noticed each other initially. The ballroom was crowded, filled with hundreds of guests, multiple displays, and constant movement as people networked and moved between presentations. Vincent was engaged in a detailed conversation about sustainable building materials when Caroline was answering questions about construction techniques for low-income housing projects on the opposite side of the room. But fate has a way of creating the perfect moment, and that moment came when Vincent, taking a break from intense conversations, stepped onto the hotel's outdoor terrace for some fresh air and quiet reflection. The terrace overlooked Lagos's glittering skyline, a view that usually filled Vincent with pride in his city's growth and development. Caroline, feeling overwhelmed by the crowd and needing a moment to collect herself, had the same idea. She stepped onto the terrace from a different entrance, seeking a few minutes of peace away from the noise and social pressure inside. She stood at the railing, looking out at the lights of Lagos, thinking about how strange it was to be in this world of wealth while her siblings were probably doing homework at their small table under a single light bulb. Vincent noticed her first, a woman in a simple dress, standing alone, seeming to actually look at the city rather than posing for social media photos or networking with other guests. Something about her posture, her quiet dignity, seemed familiar. When she turned slightly, Vincent's heart stopped. It was Caroline, the woman who'd returned his wallet, who'd refused his reward, who'd shown him what genuine goodness looked like. She was here at his charity gala, looking exactly as he remembered but somehow even more beautiful in the evening light. Vincent approached slowly, his heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with business deals or financial success. For months, he'd wondered if he'd ever see Caroline again, if their brief encounter had been a once-in-a-lifetime moment of authentic human connection. Now here she was, and he had no idea what to say. Caroline sensed someone approaching and turned, expecting to see another gala guest making polite conversation. When she saw Vincent walking toward her, her breath caught in her throat. The billionaire from the construction site, the man whose wallet she'd returned, the person who'd offered help she couldn't accept, was here at this charity event. For a moment, they just looked at each other, both remembering their first meeting, both wondering what coincidence or design had brought them together again. Vincent spoke first, his usual confident business persona replaced by something more genuine and uncertain. He told her how surprised and happy he was to see her again, how he'd hoped she would call using the number he'd given her. Caroline explained about losing his business card in the rain, how she'd actually wanted to contact him to properly thank him for his kindness. The conversation flowed naturally, without the awkwardness that might have been expected between two people from such different worlds. They talked about the charity gala, about the community projects being showcased inside. Caroline explained that she was representing her construction company, describing some of the housing projects they'd worked on for low-income families. Vincent listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed he understood the real challenges of community development. As they talked, Vincent realized that Caroline wasn't just someone who'd done a good deed. She was someone who lived her values every day, who found meaning in work that helped build homes for families who needed them. Caroline, meanwhile, began to see past Vincent's wealth to glimpse the person underneath, someone who seemed genuinely interested in using his resources for positive change. The conversation was interrupted when Vincent's assistant appeared on the terrace, reminding him that he needed to give the evening's keynote speech. Vincent reluctantly excused himself, but not before asking Caroline if she'd stay for his speech and if they could continue their conversation afterward. Caroline agreed, curious to hear what Vincent would say to this room full of Lagos's elite. Vincent's speech that evening was unlike anything his usual audience expected. Instead of the typical wealthy donor talking about charitable giving as a social obligation, Vincent spoke passionately about the dignity of work, about the people who actually built Lagos's infrastructure with their own hands. He talked about learning to see beyond social and economic divisions to recognize the common humanity that connected everyone in the room. Without mentioning Caroline by name, Vincent described meeting someone who'd shown him what integrity looked like, someone who'd chosen to do the right thing without expecting recognition or reward. He challenged the wealthy guests to look beyond their comfortable social circles, to find ways to contribute that involved more than just writing checks. Caroline listened from the back of the ballroom, recognizing herself in Vincent's words, understanding that their brief encounter had affected him as deeply as it had affected her. She saw other guests looking around, wondering who Vincent was talking about, but she remained quietly in place, moved by his sincerity. After the speech, Vincent found Caroline near the display area where she'd been representing her construction company. The crowd was beginning to thin as the evening wound down, but neither of them seemed ready for their conversation to end. They walked back to the terrace, this time sitting at a quiet table overlooking the city lights. Vincent told Caroline about Mary, about discovering his childhood nanny situation and his decision to build her a house. He described how working on that project had given him more satisfaction than any business deal he'd ever completed, how he'd started spending time at construction sites and learning to appreciate the skill and dignity of physical work. Caroline shared more about her own life, about caring for her siblings since she was 16, about finding strength and purpose in work that others might see as just manual labor. She talked about the challenges of being a woman in construction, about earning respect through skill and determination rather than expecting it to be given. As they talked, both Vincent and Caroline realized they were experiencing something neither had felt before, a genuine connection that transcended their different backgrounds and circumstances. Vincent had never met someone so selfless and strong, while Caroline had never encountered wealth combined with such genuine humility and desire to do good. The evening was getting late, and other guests were beginning to leave. Vincent didn't want to end their conversation, but he also didn't want to pressure Caroline or make her uncomfortable. He asked if he could drive her home, but Caroline politely declined, explaining that she preferred to make her own way back to Mushin. Before they parted, Vincent asked Caroline about her current work, genuinely interested in the projects her construction company was handling. Caroline mentioned that they were working on several residential developments, including a special custom home for a client who was very involved in the construction process. She described how unusual it was to have a client who visited the site regularly and seemed genuinely interested in every detail of the building process. Vincent's heart nearly stopped. Could it be possible that Caroline was working on Mary's house? The coincidence seemed too incredible, but as Caroline described the project, a custom home in a specific Lagos neighborhood for an elderly woman with a client who visited daily, Vincent realized that fate had orchestrated something extraordinary. He told Caroline that he thought she might be working on his project, that he was the client building a house for his former nanny. Caroline's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. The demanding but respectful client her supervisors had mentioned, the man who treated construction workers with unusual dignity and interest, was Vincent. They both laughed at the incredible coincidence, but underneath the laughter was a deeper recognition that their lives were becoming intertwined in ways that seemed beyond mere chance. Vincent asked Caroline if he could visit the construction site the next day, not as the project's client checking on progress, but as Vincent wanting to see Caroline in her element,